Okay, welcome back. So, in this extract, we're going to be looking at Scrooge's relationship with his fiancée, Belle, again, a memory that he is revisiting with the ghost of Christmas past. This scene immediately follows that of Fezziwig's ball, which was a really joyful and pleasant experience that Scrooge was happy to revisit. This one is a little bit more painful for Scrooge, and we start to understand how he has become the isolated character that we met in Stave 1. This is quite a nice short extract, so it's not going to take us long to go through, but as usual I'll be reading this full extract first of all before we go through the analysis. So if you've already read this and you don't need to listen to this being read aloud to you, you can just jump straight ahead and I'll put the timings in the notes below. If you need to hear this read aloud, if that helps you, we'll jump in and start that now. So, "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick." This was not addressed to Scrooge, or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears which sparkled in the light that shone out of the ghost of Christmas past. "It matters little," she said softly. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one." "This is the even-handed dealing of the world," he said. "There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth." "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not?" "What then?" he retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you." She shook her head. "Am I?" "Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until, in good season, we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man." "I was a boy," he said impatiently. "Your own feeling tells you that you are not what you are," she returned. "I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it, and can release you." "Have I ever sought release?" "In words, no, never." "In what then?" "In a changed spirit, in a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us," said the girl, looking mildly but with steadiness upon him, "tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me, now?" "Ah, no." He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, "You think not?" "I would gladly think otherwise if I could," she answered. "Heaven knows, when I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can I even believe that you would choose a dowerless girl, you who, in your very confidence with her, weigh everything by gain? Or choosing her, if for a moment you were false enough to your one guiding principle to do so, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you, with a full heart, for the love of him you once were." He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. "You may. The memory of what is past half makes me hope you will have pain in this. A very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly as an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen." She left him, and they parted. "Spirit," said Scrooge, "show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?" "One shadow more," exclaimed the ghost. "No more," cried Scrooge. "No more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more." Okay, so a short extract, but a really powerful one. Let's have a look through some of these quotations and see what Dickens is illustrating to us here, what he is revealing about these characters and about his protagonist, his main character, Scrooge in particular. So we've moved forwards a little bit in time. This is a couple of years later, after Fezziwig's ball. Even though that was the scene that we just visited, we've moved forwards, and Scrooge is now in the prime of life, so he's a little bit older. But even though his face doesn't have these harsh or rigid lines of later years, he doesn't have the wrinkles that he does as an old man, there is something that has changed in his face. Dickens writes it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. So there is something about Scrooge's character, something about his personality that you can see in his face, in the way he looks and his expression. So even though his face is still youthful, it shows signs of care and avarice is greed. So this suggests that Scrooge's love of material wealth, by material wealth I mean money, I mean the things that you acquire in terms of wealth. So Scrooge's love of wealth, familiar to us from Stave 1, has begun to take hold of him. It's begun to take deep root. And we see this in the motion of his eyes. His eyes are eager and greedy and restless, suggesting that he won't be satisfied until he has acquired more wealth. This is his focus. This is where his attention really is. Notice that he's sitting down next to the woman that he is engaged to be married to, and yet he seems restless. This isn't satisfying him. He wants something else, something different. And this shows the passion that had taken root. So Dickens uses an extended metaphor here of a tree. The passion that's taken root, it's still growing, but we see in the motion of his eyes the shadow that this growing tree of passion is going to cast across his life. So we see that this is something which is not yet fully developed in him. His greed and his obsession with money is still a seed, it's still small, it's still young. But it's something that's going to grow into a mighty tree that's going to take over his life. It's something that's going to really define his character as he becomes older. So he's sitting next to a fair young girl in a mourning dress. And a mourning dress, so the outfit of someone who's gone through a loss, who's lost someone, who is in mourning, grieving someone who's died. And she's crying. She says, "It matters little, to you very little." And they're discussing their relationship. So she is in mourning dress, illustrating that she's lost a loved one. They don't speak about whether this is someone who has died, but it is hinted that perhaps the loved one that she has lost is in fact Scrooge. Not that he's died, but that they have fallen out of love. So this is Belle. This is the young woman to whom Scrooge was once engaged, and she's crying, but she says to Scrooge that this matters very little. So this suggests to us that she expects that he won't care about her unhappiness. She says, "It matters little, to you, very little." So she doesn't expect him to empathise and to feel her unhappiness with her. So this hints at his lack of kindness. And given that this is the woman that he is one day to marry, we start to think, well, is there anyone that he does show kindness to? He doesn't show it to Fred, he now doesn't show it to Belle either. So she states that another idol has displaced her. That is, it's moved her out of the way. That's what displaced means. So an idol is something that's worshipped, but Scrooge doesn't worship her, she's saying. Another idol, something else that you worship, has pushed me aside. In fact, he worships money. So she's suggesting, you no longer love me, you love something else more. And she makes it very clear when he says, "What idol has displaced you? What do you think that I love more than you?" She says, "A golden one. You worship gold, you worship money. You're not in love with me, you're in love with wealth." And he is quite dismissive of this, but she gently tells him, all your other hopes have merged into this one hope. All your nobler aspirations, all of those ambitions that you once had that were more moral, that were more noble, that were better, all of them have fallen away, all of them have disappeared one by one until this one passion, gain, that is gaining wealth, engrosses you. You're obsessed with one thing. So Belle confronts Scrooge with the idea that he's given up his nobler ambitions in exchange for the pursuit of wealth. We now see how his obsession with money has caused him to push away goodness, that is, in terms of his ambitions, he's no longer interested in noble aspirations, whatever they may have been, but it's also causing him to push away the woman that he loved. So clearly we see that Belle is unhappy in their relationship. She's there weeping next to him, saying, "You no longer love me, you love money more." So it's caused him to lose some of his goodness, but it's also causing him to push away the good things in his life, like Belle. Continuing, he says, "What? Even if I've grown so much wiser, what then? I'm not changed towards you." So he says, if I'm wiser in the way that I go about my life, he thinks that it's intelligent, that it's clever to be pursuing money. He says, I haven't changed in my attitude towards you. But she says, yes, you have. You're a different person now. She refers to their engagement, and she calls it a contract. Our contract is an old one, she says. So she explains that their engagement was made when they were both young and poor, when we were both poor and content to be so, so when we didn't mind that we didn't have very much. But she says, when you made this engagement, you were another man. So she says that Scrooge was entirely different when he was younger, and that as he's grown older, he has changed, that his pursuit of wealth, that his growing obsession with money has changed him from the man that she became engaged to. He refers to this, she says, you were another man, he says, I was a boy. So what he sees as a natural process of maturing, she sees as a complete change in character. She continues and says, it is enough that I have thought of it and can release you. So she says the idea of their engagement makes her unhappy. She describes it as being fraught with misery. So it once promised happiness, now it's fraught with misery. Their engagement once delighted her, now it makes her very upset. So she offers to release Scrooge, to free him of the obligation to marry her. So, having referred to this as a contract, he would have been expected to go through with their wedding, with their marriage, but she says, you no longer need to do that. I release you from your obligation. You don't have to go through with our marriage. He challenges this and says, have I ever given you any reason to think that I don't want to marry you? And she says, not in words, but in your changed nature, in the way that you yourself are different. And she even challenges him further. She says, if we had never been engaged, would you seek me out? Would you try and win my heart now? And he can't answer that question. But he just says, well, you don't think so. You think not. So he struggles to accept her version of how she sees him. He doesn't understand why she is doing this or why she is saying this. He doesn't realise how much he has changed, but to her it's completely inescapable and very obvious. She continues and says, in a very, very brief time you will dismiss the recollection of it. So before too long you will not even remember this. You won't even think about this moment. You won't even think about our engagement. She says, it will seem to you an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. So this is really interesting language that Dickens chooses to use here. Belle refers to how she thinks he will see their engagement when he thinks back on it. She says, you will think of it as an unprofitable dream. So the language of love here is replaced by the language of wealth and money and value. She believes that he will come to see it as unprofitable, that when he looks back on it, he will think it's something that he was lucky to avoid because it wasn't worth it. So she leaves him and they parted. And we see really clearly that as a memory, this is one that was very, very upsetting to Scrooge. While all of the others have been pleasant, they've caused him happiness, this one has caused him utter misery. So it also causes us to reflect on his reaction when Fred spoke of his own wife in Stave 1. When Fred refers to his marriage, Scrooge becomes really angry, and that response is due to his own unhappiness in love. He finds it hard to accept that Fred is happily married when romantic relationships caused him pain. So he can only blame himself for the loss of Belle and his own actions for her breaking off their engagement. But it's interesting, isn't it, that he didn't change his behaviour after this moment. She tells him very clearly, your obsession with money is why we are not going to be married. Your obsession with money has caused the end of our relationship. But he doesn't take this as a sign that he should change his ways. Instead, as he grows older, he withdraws into that obsession and he becomes even more focused on the accumulation of wealth until we meet the man that we meet in Stave 1. As he gets older and older and older, he grows more and more and more obsessed with money, even though clearly it's been the cause of misery and unhappiness in his relationships with others. Okay, I hope that was useful. We start to see here the reasons for Scrooge becoming the man that he is in Stave 1, and we start to see as well the reasons for his unhappiness, the reasons for his misery, and how he can go about changing and how he can go about mending his ways. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.